Coming up in this week's Torah Pearls.
How many times does Moses commission Joshua?
Is it possible to reconstruct the final words of Moses in the Moses scroll?
Per the biblical writers, how many Sukkots did the children of Israel keep from the time of Joshua through the time of Ezra and Nehemiah?
In light of the Moses scroll, should we keep the feast days?
All right, Jono. It's only one chapter, but it's a big one. We got to jump in.
Let's go. G'day, dear viewers, and thank you once again for joining us here on truth2u.org, truth2u.org. I'm Jono Vandor, and from the Horeb Institute is the author of the Moses Scroll, Ross K. Nichols. G'day, mate.
My friend.
Doing very well, thank you, my friend. We only have one chapter. Is this the only
one
Torah portion
chapter?
That is
That's
one
it?
chapter?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Could be a quick show.
Maybe the next one is one chapter as well. I'm not sure, but either way,
Vayelekh.
One chapter. We ought to be able to knock this right out then.
I think so. There's some interesting stuff in it and a little bit of Moses Scroll, so we're going to get into it forthwith. But before we do, we have our AI critical scholar joining us, Ezra. So Ezra, would you be so kind as to give us a summary of Vayelekh?
Shabbat Shalom to all our listeners. This week's portion is Vayelekh, short but packed with significance. We find Moses preparing for his final day. He tells the people he's 120 years old and that Jehovah has told him he won't be crossing the Jordan. Joshua is appointed as his successor. Then, Moses writes down the Torah and delivers it to the Levites, charging them to read it publicly every 7 years during Sukkot in the year of release. Critically, this passage reflects post-monarchic concerns, especially the emphasis on written law and public reading, which scholars link to the Deuteronomistic reforms. The command to read the Torah cyclically suggests a shift toward textual authority, a theme aligned with late editing stages in the documentary hypothesis framework. So, it's a farewell speech, yes, but one with a clear literary agenda, establishing Torah as a central, national institution.
Everything that Ezra gave us in that opening bit it matches a lot of what I have in my notes as far as what I want to talk about. So this is going to be good. It is densely packed, but man, there's a lot to it.
It's densely packed, and there's a number of sources that are identified in here, and one of those is, of course, is our Moses scroll. But before we get there, in the first verse, Ross, it starts in the third person, meaning Moses didn't write this bit.
Somebody else wrote it.
Somebody else wrote, Moses went and spoke all these things to Israel, and he said to them. And this is why it's called Vayelekh, because and he went, right? He went.
Yep.
But did he, Ross? So first of all, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, 1Q5, Deuteronomy, it renders it a little bit differently. It says, instead of saying, and Moses went and spoke, it says, and Moses finished speaking all these words to all Israel. And it seems like at one stage, this was the end of a particular scroll.
Aha.
Whereas a latter writer, I suppose a redactor or whatever, wants to add a little bit more to this. So what we have here in our canonical text is Moses went and spoke. But what happens is we go straight into a piece of the Moses scroll. The way before you do that, let me just say, I think that the idea that you just expressed, that a later pen adds content here. What we're going to see, I think, as we work through, is some of what we read in chapter 31, we already know. I mean, we already know some of this stuff. There's the transference of leadership. Look, this stuff's already happened. It's a done deal. Go ahead, Jono. Sorry. And a lot of it's kind of redundant too, Ross. What we have is information given to us from one perspective or from one person, and then that same information is related, in a different way, or it might come from God, and then all of a sudden it's related to us, the same information from Moses. We're going to see a lot of repetition here.
Right.
In verses 2 to 6, Richard Elliott Freeman attributes this first section of the chapter to DTR1. We'll talk a bit more about that later.
By the way,
Baden
it's page 192 on the Torah tablet, and you'll see
in your Torah
DTR1 right there. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Go ahead.
And so Baden attributes the middle section of verse 2. Interestingly enough, this middle section of verse 2, which comes from our Moses scroll, he attributes to the redactor. And I suppose, I don't know why that is, but it might be because the age of 120 is a remarkable age, an almost unbelievable age. And perhaps he thinks that this is, retrojected, taken from other, maybe from Genesis chapter 6 or something, where it says that man's years will be 120 and so on and so forth. I'm not too sure what his reasoning is there, but that's how he places it. But it does come from the Moses scroll. Let me read it as it appears firstly in our canonical text. Or maybe you want to do that. Give it to us from the Torah tablet.
All right. Let's see. What do you want me to read? Just 1 through
Let's go
2?
2, 3. 2 and 3, I think.
Okay, here we go. And he said unto them, I am 120 years old this day. I can no more go out and come in. I want to talk about that in a moment. And Jehovah hath said unto me, thou shalt not go over this Jordan. Jehovah thy God, he will go over before thee. He will destroy these nations from before thee, and thou shalt dispossess them. And Joshua, he shall go over before thee, as Jehovah hath spoken.
As Jehovah has spoken. The way that it appears in the Moses scroll, and this is HB 4, 5, 6, it says, I am 120 years old today. I'm unable to go out or to come in before you. And Elohim has said to me, you shall not cross the Jordan. Joshua, who stands before you, he will cross the Jordan, and he will go with you into that good land that you are to enter there to possess it. Be strong, be courageous, do not fear, and do not be dismayed, because Elohim, your God, he will go with you. And then that's HB 7. Then in HB 8 and following, Ross, all we have is 3 words. This section of the Moses scroll, the end of the Moses scroll, it's so frustrating, was quite fragmented. It was very difficult to read, and all they could really derive from this were 3 words. And those 3 words are not consecutive. There are words in between them. And what we have is this, Hazod, Benechem, is that right? I think, before you, and because, and that's it.
Yeah.
Now
let me add one thing to this, because as I look at the Hebrew, what we see in HB 6 and following, HB 7, we have 2 letters of a word, Lamed Kaf. So on the previous line, it says, hey, and then the line is broken. In other words, so it looks like who will walk or who will go, right? So that's where you get that. Now, anyway, back to you. I just wanted to point out, and then you just have the 3 words that you see, that you mentioned. All
and
right?
not a lot of space before you get to, because what they are able to read is the scribal foot end note at the end that says, these are the words that Moses spoke. So we know that there's a limited amount of space there. There's not a lot of text. I had to go at a reconstruction. If there are viewers that also have had to go at a reconstruction, put it in the comments, because we'd love to see it, and your reasoning for this reconstruction. But what I have is, I'm 100 years old today. I'm no longer able to go out and come in. Elohim has said to me, you shall not cross the Jordan. Joshua, who stands before you, he himself will cross the Jordan, and he will go with you into that good land that you are entering there to possess it. Be strong and courageous. Do not fear. Do not be dismayed, because Elohim, your God, he will go with you. If you will only guard all this Torah, there's the Hazot, this Torah that I set before you. There's the before you today. For he will not desert you or abandon you. And there's the for is the key, which because. Now, interestingly,
is that your reconstruction?
That's my reconstruction.
Well, look, let me just say, as I look at this, it's a good argument. So you and I will have to talk offline because I see where you're coming from. Okay, go ahead. Interesting.
It's the best I can do with it. Dershowitz has an entirely different reconstruction. His reconstruction appears to be derived from 31 verse 21 in Deuteronomy, which is, what does that say? That says, next page. And many evils and troubles befall them. And then this poem shall confront them as a witness, since it will never be lost from the mouth of their offspring. For I know their plans that they are devising, even now, before I bring them into the land that I promise on oath.
Wow, that's a lot of text there.
It is, and that's actually, we're going to get there, but this is God addressing Moses privately. So who wrote this down? Because anyway, we'll talk about that. Verse 26, on the other hand, of the same chapter, just a little bit further on, take this book of the teaching and place it beside the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, that it remain there as a witness against you. That's, I think, another verse that that he is using to construct his or reconstruct the end of the Moses scroll. It's interesting because it switches to the first. I can kind of see why he uses these, because it does it switches back to the first person of Moses addressing the people. Or is he? We're going to get there. He's actually addressing the Levites, and then halfway through addressing the Levites, it seems to be readdressed to the peoples. There's a lot of switching in this chapter.
I got you.
But in any case, before this, we have third-person narrative. Moses is addressing Joshua redundantly. Here we see God is saying, or Moses is saying to the people, Joshua is going to be the man. In a minute, we're going to see Moses go to Joshua and say privately, "You're going to be the man." Right? He says it again. Jehovah speaking to Moses, and so on and so forth. Anyway, there's some sense. I'm sure. Look, Dershowitz is brilliant. If we sat down with him and he explained why he has this reconstruction, I'm sure we'd probably
would at least understand his position. Yeah, would at least understand his position better.
These latter lines: be strong and resolute, do not fear and do not panic, for Elohim your God, he is the one who walks alongside you. He will not let you go. He will not abandon you. Now write down this teaching, there's Hazot, so that this teaching may be a witness before you, there's the before you, since it will not be forgotten from the mouths of your descendants, for, there's Kri, I know the schemes that you devise. So what we have in Dershowitz's reconstruction is a cranky Moses, angry Moses, not so happy there. After all, he's 120 years old. We'll let the viewers decide which one they like better. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to go back and look at Dershowitz's reconstruction. One of the things that I tried to do because I didn't have Dershowitz. I mean, this was me taking the Hebrew that I found of Ginsburg and the Hebrew that I had from Goethe and Meyer, and looking at it and trying to understand if they had a particular view. And then in addition to that, I looked for the words just like you did, just like Dershowitz did, a sentence, a verse within the Torah that had the words that I was looking for. One thing that Dershowitz typically will do, he looks at line length. So he tries to supply the gaps with sufficient letters making words that equal the correct length. Now, just as an example, in HB8, the 8th line of the end of the scroll, for all intents and purposes, we don't have any letters discerned. So they don't know what 8 says. So you either have to supply it, which is just a guess, a scholarly conjecture. And so I tried to minimize that in my translation, in my transcription. And part of that is because I didn't want to add to it. I just don't know. So I would leave, like you'll see in mine, I just have the brackets for 8. I don't know. They didn't know. They were looking at it in person. So, but it is interesting. What did it say? and that's a fun exercise. So we'll have to look at that. But I do want to jump back when you're ready to this idea.
No longer go in and go out and come in.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, that is a phrase that we meet with in the Hebrew Bible in a number of different places. In Joshua, I have Joshua 14:11. I have 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 7. In 1 Kings chapter 3, it's Solomon saying that he's too young to go out and come in, like whatever that means. And in Joshua chapter 14, verse 11, he's relaying the message that he's too old. It indicates, at least as best we can tell, something associated with, for one reason or another, you're either too young or too old to effectively lead, right? To lead the group. And that's kind of the understanding that we get in Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy, we meet with this idea that Moses isn't going to cross into the promised land. Now, in Deuteronomy, to my recollection, there's no reason given. In other words, you don't get the reason like, because I was disobedient and I hit the rock, I hit it once or I hit it twice. You don't get any of that. You just get this idea, might be hinted at a little bit in Deuteronomy 3, that God's angry with him. But in Deuteronomy 3, he says, God was so angry with me, he's not going to let me in. But in the book of Numbers, say, for instance, in chapter 20 and verse 12, God's not mad at Moses because of the people. He's mad at Moses because of what Moses and Aaron did. They did not show faith at this incident at Meribah, right? So anyway, you get the impression, and I just jotted down in my notes that Deuteronomy 31:2 seems to be Moses just saying, I'm 120 years old. I can't go out and come in anymore.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Leave me alone. I'm done. Right? I'm super old.
And isn't that the picture we get in the Moses scroll? He's not saying because I did something wrong and God didn't let me. Now, one of the views, Jono, as you know, is some people say, well, you know, Moses is at the end and he doesn't want to, you know, put this on himself. Like, you know, he's not going to share publicly. But that's from the same group of people who said that he wrote all of it. So I don't buy that. I think this is a different source. It's clearly a different source in my view. And so anyway, that's my idea.
I agree with that. I absolutely agree. And it is interesting. 120 is not an impossible age. It's a highly unlikely age. It is a remarkable age if he lived that long. It reminds me that Ramesses lived to be 90 or just beyond 90.
Yeah.
And so we're talking, you know, almost 3 decades on top of that. And so maybe.
Yeah.
And certainly if I was 120 years old, just leave me alone. I'm done.
Hey, and to your point, I think you actually mentioned Genesis 6 a little while ago. Some scholars have recommended that this becomes, according to a priestly pen, the idyllic age, because in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 3, it says that my spirit will not abide in 120 days. But let me do one thing before we move on. In Deuteronomy 3:23 through 28, let me just pick up in verse 25, because this is another episode recorded in Deuteronomy about his wanting to go and God wouldn't let him. Verse 25, let me go over, I pray thee, and see the good land that is beyond the Jordan, that goodly mountain in Lebanon. But Jehovah was wroth with me for your sakes, and hearken not unto me. And Jehovah said unto me, let it suffice thee, speak no more unto me of this matter. Get thee up to the top of Pisgah, lift up your eyes westward, northward, and so forth. Then verse 28, but charge Joshua and encourage him and strengthen him, for he shall go over before this people, and he shall cause him to inherit the land which thou shalt see. Now, the reason I brought that in is because one of the episodes, when you kicked us off, you talk about there's some redundancy and repetition. This is retelling a story that's already taken place. So Deuteronomy 3 is written to describe, I want you to go commission Joshua. You're not going to go, he's going to go. But we already had that in Numbers chapter 27. In Numbers 27, it actually goes through this same scenario. In fact, in previous classes I've taught, I do a horizontal reading where I put Numbers 27, Deuteronomy 3, Deuteronomy 31, Deuteronomy 32, verses 44 through 52. All of these tell the same story. And it's like the last bit of Moses, how he's preparing for the end, and part of that is handing over the leadership to Joshua. And by the way, for people who are watching, put in your notes, Numbers 27, verse 22, because after God tells Moses to commission Joshua in front of the people, which we just read in Deuteronomy 3, it's already done. Verse 22 says, and Moses did it. It's already done. Anyway, for what that's worth.
He's been dying for a long time. I mean, his pending inevitable death has been hanging over him for a very long time, and we've been doing this now for how many weeks since we read it first in Numbers. But here we are again, and you're right. We've already done this apparently.
And one other point on that. Friedman is where I learned this first. Back in Numbers 27, where the deal goes down, where Moses is told, you're not going in, go ahead and commission Joshua. What Moses does there is he prays to God because he knows that it's a done deal, but he says this, paraphrasing, please, God, appoint someone who will go in and come out before the people so that they're not like sheep without a shepherd. And what Friedman says, excuse me, I had a block there for a second. What Friedman says is, this is the last recorded word from Moses to God. In other words, everything after that, he never talks to God again directly. He talks about what happened.
That's fascinating.
But it's interesting, yeah. So the last thing, the way he presents it is, the very last thing that Moses asked God for is, please, just don't leave them without a shepherd, which is significant.
Really interesting. Yeah, I'd never thought of that. That really is fascinating. 31:29. Moses wrote down this teaching. It is written as if, or it might be verse 10 in the
31 verse 9. Yeah, 31. You said 29, okay. But verse 9.
31:9. And Moses wrote down, and it speaks. It presents this as if he's finished talking now. Before I forget it, let me just write all of that down. But clearly, the sense that you get, particularly when you're reading the Moses scroll, is that this is something that Moses wrote down as a speech to address the people with. Yeah, I think that's pretty clear.
And I love this verse. We'll get into it a little bit more when we get to verse 24. But just to prepare the viewer, this is very significant if you look at it and you think about it deeply. Because one of the things that I want to stress, particularly when we get to verse 24 and following, is that this is not talking about the Pentateuch. It is not, because in verse 9, Moses wrote, HaTorah Hazot, this Torah. The writer, whoever that is, wants you to know, we're talking about this one, and he delivered it to the priests, the sons of Levi. In Hebrew, it's the Levitical priest, which, again, Deuteronomy doesn't know about the sons of Aaron, that bear the Ark of the Covenant. Now, that's a specific group of Levites, Jono. It's not just any old Levite. If you look at the Korahites, right? Yeah, if you look at, particularly in the priestly code. But anyway, we've gone into that. But again, I just want to stress that somebody, imagine this, someone who's telling this story wants the reader to know, to believe that they are witnessing Moses wrote this teaching, the Torah, and it's a done deal. And by the way, if we look at previous text, we see in chapter 29, verse 27, it presupposes that the words of this law are already written. Well, how is that? It's because a later writer is speaking from the point of view that Torah exists already. We'll unpack
we have a little
that more.
We have a little bit more information too, by the way, in 4Q35 on this verse. So it renders, instead of saying that Moses wrote this law and delivered it to the priests, the sons of Levi, it says Moses wrote this law on a scroll. It adds on a scroll, which is interesting. Now, 31:10-13. Let me read it. Let's go here.
All right.
Moses instructed them as follows: every seventh year, Ross, set the year set for remission at the Feast of Booths, right? When all Israel come to appear before the Lord your God in the place that he will choose, you shall read this teaching, this Torah aloud in the presence of all of Israel. Gather your people, the men, women, the children, and the strangers in your communities, that they may hear and also learn to revere the Lord your God and to observe faithfully every word of this teaching. That children too, who have not yet had the experience, shall hear and learn to revere the Lord your God as long as they live in the land that you are about to cross the Jordan to possess.
Yep.
A repetition of law code. Now, we read that when we were in chapter 15. This calendar event, verses 1-11, also in chapter 16, verses 13 and 15. But the interesting thing about this, of course, is what we read in Nehemiah, about Ezra in Nehemiah chapter 8.
Right. Wait. But before we go there, can I jump in there just quickly? Because I want to get there too. But I was just going to say that we get the impression, particularly here, that this is going to happen at the Festival of Booths, of Sukkot, and it's going to happen every 7 years. And so I was interested, and I'll just quickly touch on a few leading up to that one, where the law, the Torah, is read to the people. So the first one is in Exodus 24:7, and he took the book of the covenant, again, this is like it's already written, and read in the audience of the people, and they said, all that Jehovah has spoken we will do, and we will hear, or we will be obedient. All right, so but the book of the covenant's already there. This is Exodus 24.
That's when Moses threw the blood on them. Okay, good.
That's right.
Continue.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, the next one is in Joshua chapter 8, verse 34 and 35. Now, this is when the children of Israel have crossed over, and this is Eval and Gerizim. And notice it says in verse 34, and afterward he read all the words of the law, the blessing and the curse, according to all that's written in the book of the law. Therefore, there was not a word of all that Moses commanded, which Joshua read not before the assembly of Israel, the women, the little ones, the sojourners that were among them. Now the question becomes, did Moses read in Exodus 24, Genesis 1:1 through Deuteronomy 34:12? No. Did Joshua read Genesis 1:1 through Deuteronomy 34:12? No. I mean, how long would that take? It would take an incredible long time. Then we get to an episode when the Torah is discovered in the year 622, and that's 2 Kings chapter 23, verses 1 through 3, and there's not many, but I did want to touch these. Here we go. 23, verses 1 through 3 says, the king set and gathered everyone. I'm just going to skip over the details. You can look it up, both small and great. I'm in verse 2. And he read in their ears all the words of the book of the covenant, which was found in the house of Jehovah. So he read it all to the assembled masses. Now, we don't get any indication of the date of these. And Jono, I'm sorry, now this brings us to Nehemiah 8. Pick it
Nehemiah
up there.
Chapter 8.
Let's see. Yeah.
And just before we do, I just want to go back to Joshua chapter 8, verse 35, because it's just such a great verse, and it's worth reading again. Verse 34, actually. After that, he read all the words of the teaching, the blessing, and the curse, just as it is written in the book of the teaching. The Torah, the blessing, and the curse, in that order, the order that it appears in the Moses scroll. the blessings that are expunged from our canonical text. This is what it says Joshua read. I love that, and I just wanted to highlight it. But
good point.
But yeah, going back to Nehemiah chapter 8, we have Ezra, the people gathering at dawn, and he reads the law as he knows it. There's some kind of a copy of what might be close to Deuteronomy, perhaps, and he's reading it on the first day of the 7th month. It doesn't seem to be any particular day. There's no mention of any sort of calendar.
Are they blowing trumpets? Seriously, are they blowing trumpets?
There's nothing about blowing trumpets. They don't mention Yom Teruah. They don't mention Rosh Hashanah. They don't mention anything like this. They just gather on the first day of the 7th month, and it seems to be in preparation for the Feast of Booths. But they're gathering the people for the purpose of reading them the scroll of the Torah of Moses, right?
Yeah.
If they knew of this law that we just read, then they would have waited a couple of weeks to do it at the right time. But they don't do that because they don't have that. There's a number of things that are conspicuously missing from this chapter, and that is not just Yom Teruah. It's not just that they're reading it 2 weeks earlier. It's also Yom Kippur is totally missing. But we do know something of the Feast of Booths, and we even have a little bit of extra information. They're reading something that has a little bit of extra information that we don't have in our canonical texts.
I'm ready. I'm ready. Well, I was going to say, one of the things that we find, I remember when I first saw this, in fact, you and I were already working closely in these texts at this time. And one of the things that really struck me in this story in Nehemiah chapter 8, of course, like you said, it tells us where we're at chronologically. No one is surprised. Like no one says, hey, wait a minute, it's the first day of the 7th month. Where are the shofar? Where's the shofar? We need to blow the shofar. But what it does say is this: when they start, in fact, in verse 13, they decide, because they're reading something, and it says that they realized that they needed to keep the booths, the festival of booths, Sukkot. But notice what it says in verse 17. And all the assembly of them that were come again out of the captivity made booths. You go, good. They're following the Torah, right? And they dwelt in booths, for since the days of Joshua the son of Nun unto that day, had not the children of Israel done so? Is that what you have?
I have. The Israelites had not done so from the days of Joshua son of Nun to that day.
Yeah, that's
so. In other words, is that what you have?
Yeah, so they're not. You're telling me that, I got the impression, kind of growing up, in a biblical faith in various forms, and even into my adulthood, I just assumed that all the time people have been doing this. But here we've got a clear indication, at least from this writer, that they hadn't done this since the days of Joshua. And that makes me wonder, well, did they really even do it in the days of Joshua? It's almost like at the time this is written, post-exile, they're putting something into the story. Now, what I find striking about this, and I'll just throw it out there, is to consider that when they do the Passover in the days of Josiah, right before the exile, it says that they haven't kept it since the days of Samuel or the Judges, depending on whether you're reading Chronicles or Kings. So this makes me wonder, at what point do these festivals come into the text? Now, of course, we kind of approach the text as they're packed together in our nice little Bible, that this was known, and maybe they just weren't being obedient. But the idea that comes across now is that they weren't doing it at all.
They weren't doing it at all because they didn't have that instruction. And it is codified, I suppose, in the Josianic Reform, but it wasn't that long after the Josianic Reform that they are exiled from the land. And finally, when they are a remnant is brought back into the land and they're starting to renovate the temple, they're acknowledging, we really didn't get to do this when it was revealed to us. When the scroll was discovered in the temple, didn't really get to do this, and So now we're going to start doing it as it is written. We need to do this thing because we haven't been keeping this institution since Joshua. Makes a lot of sense. Makes much more sense.
Viewers, just let this soak in for a minute, because you don't have to buy everything that we're putting before you, but consider, go back. Here's what I would propose. All of these viewers are good students. Go find examples where the Torah, however you define it, is read publicly at any time from the time that we meet it in the Pentateuch until this particular text. Go find it. Particularly, find it being read during Sukkot. There's no mention of it. It's just not there. In fact, and by the way, one more thing is that this is at least in the 7th month in Nehemiah chapter 8. Nehemiah chapter 9 begins the 24th day of this month. And then down in verse 3, it says they stood up in their place and they read in the book of the law of Jehovah their God, a fourth part of the day. So at least they're reading it again, but again, it's not the time that we would expect them to be reading it.
So this is timely that we're going into detail here, because I was telling you off air just before, I had a question from a long-time viewer. I won't read her name, but late last night, she sent me a question and she said, look, I have a personal question. Since the Sabbath is the only holy day mentioned in the Shapira scrolls, are you still observing the feast days? And I thought, well, that's a great question. And the answer that I gave is, for the same reason Karaites don't observe Hanukkah, I no longer observe the feast days, particularly in light of the 7th word as it appears in the Shapira scroll. And the 7th word, of course, is "do not lift my name to deceive." And that is the reason why Karaites don't observe Hanukkah. They say, well, God did not institute this. We say that he did, but we don't have a text to support it. We just don't believe that this is what, and we should not attribute to him, calendar days that he did not command. Well, in light of everything that we've been, this whole series that we've done, and the example that we just gave, I no longer observe these days because I don't want to attribute to God something that he did not command. So there you have it. So it does.
Let me drill down just for a minute, because one of the things that I think is pretty clear is that we know that the festivals came to be a major part of religion in ancient Israel. There's no doubt that absolutely is true, particularly in the latter period of the biblical narratives. What we do find, though, and I think what we're trying to highlight, is that during the interim period, at least the period presented as the days of Moses, from that until late in the monarchy, we see none of this. For whatever reason, we just don't see it. The hypothesis is that maybe that wasn't established until later. So here's one more point. Like you said, Leviticus 23, these are the festivals of the Lord, and it ticks them off. Shabbat is listed first, by the way. And then it goes into all of these different festivals, which don't always concur with what we read, say, in Deuteronomy 16. The names are different. It's just kind of hard to put your hand around. But what is most interesting is, to me, is that in these latter texts, as we just highlighted, you see a perfect opportunity for someone to say, hey, it's the first day of the 7th month, toot your horn. Yeah. We see in Ezra chapter 3, by the way, when the 7th month was come, the children were gathered in their cities. We don't see any specific reference to any of, we don't see Yom Teruah, we don't see Yom Kippur. And then, in fact, what we do see is sacrifices. Verse 6, from the first day of the 7th month began they to offer burnt offerings unto Jehovah, but the foundation of the temple of Jehovah was not yet laid. It doesn't even, in other words, this is the perfect place to say, and it was Yom Teruah. I just wanted to underscore that. It just feels like the festivals came to represent teaching tools, No, that's not always a bad thing. For instance, if you're going to keep Sukkot, which they didn't during the biblical period, and notice what it comes to represent, because we dwelt in booths when God led them out of Egypt. Well, that's what it says in Leviticus 23, right? But you realize that they should still be in those booths. So it's a later writer saying, this they did. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Anyway.
And so it gives us an indication as to the progress of the evolution of the text of Deuteronomy, suggesting that these three ingredients, at least the every 7 years, Yom Kippur, Yom Teruah, were much later additions. But of course, what Ezra is reading in Nehemiah chapter 8 is not what Joshua was reading, which was the Torah, the blessings and the curses. What Ezra has is the Josiah revised version, right? And so he's got all of that law code there, as we just cited in Deuteronomy chapter 15 and 16. Of course, as we've already mentioned, it extends from chapter 12 to chapter 26. So he's got that. And that makes sense, Ross, because it's going to take just that amount with the Moses scroll sewn into it. It's going to take 4 or 5 hours to read that. And it says that it took, approximately 6 hours from dawn until midday with the Levites, giving some commentary as they go. Okay, well, that's fine. But clearly what they had was before an editor added these little bits into the mix as well.
Yep.
All right. Now,
if anybody's still listening, go ahead.
You got to do it, though.
That's right.
Now, verse 12, gather all the people. There's just a small little variation in 4Q39 where it says, gather, all the people, the women, the little ones, foreigners that are with you in your gates, that they may hear, that they may learn to fear Jehovah, their God. Just curious little alternative word there, as opposed to your God, their God. We had an example of that earlier on, didn't we, at the end of the Josianic Reform, where it's, you take to your offering to the priest, to your tithe. That's right. We're talking about the tithes. And you shall say, I'm offering this tithe to Jehovah, your God, to the priest and all that stuff. So it's interesting. Now, this is exciting, Ross. 31 verses 14 to 15. It's been a little while since we've had this, but the pillar of cloud and the entrance of the tent makes a comeback right here. Friedman and Baden, they both attribute these verses to the Elohist. Any thoughts?
No. When you say Elohist, Friedman, I think I saw something different.
Oh, really?
Let's see. Yeah.
Have I got that wrong? Let's have a look.
Yeah, I think in Deuteronomy, nope, you're right. You're right. It sure is. It's the e-source in Deuteronomy 31, 14, and 15. You're right.
And
sorry, I stand corrected.
They both agree. So the Lord said to Moses, the time is drawing near for you to die. That's been drawing near for, as I said, many, many chapters.
Numbers 27, yeah.
Call Joshua and present yourself in the tent of meeting that I may instruct him. Moses and Joshua went and presented themselves in the tent of meeting. The Lord appeared in the tent in a pillar of cloud, the pillar of cloud having come to rest at the entrance of the tent, surrounded by white spaces there, Ross. But yeah, just a little insertion.
Let me just touch on that, because that was the point I was making a little while ago. Clearly, it almost looks like an ancient cut and paste job. It's separated by white spaces. It interrupts the narrative flow, and it tells us something we already know in our finished Bible. The fact that Numbers chapter 27 has already told us that this has taken place, and the way this is presented, it's as if it's new news. Like, you need to do this. Let me just go, just because I've mentioned it a moment ago, but if you go to Numbers 27, you go to Numbers 27, and again, this is verse 12. I'm not going to read it all. This is where Jehovah tells Moses, go up to the Mount Abarim and look at the land. You're not going to go in, okay? And then Moses says, let God put somebody over them that can go out and come in. And as you work through this particular text, look at verse 22. This is after he tells him, you're going to take Joshua in verse 18, and you're going to lay hands on him. And then in verse 22, it says, Moses did as Jehovah commanded him. He took Joshua, set him before Eleazar the priest and before all the congregation, laid his hands on him, and gave him a charge. Well, that's what here in Deuteronomy 31, he's telling him to do. Now,
Yeah, go ahead.
Either he did it, and then God tells him, hey, you know that thing you did in the last book, do it again, or
do it again.
Or it's the same story, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I'm saying that the person who assembled these texts finally had this floating story that he wanted to put in, and he put it in again. That's all that can be.
Let me read, Ross. This is a paragraph from Alter's commentary, which is great.
I love
his
Alter.
stuff.
Yeah.
Page 725 for those who have it. He says, critical scholarship has identified a whole series of duplications, contradictions, interruptions, and shifts in terminology in this chapter, and generally has attributed them to a collation of different literary sources. The transfer of authority to Joshua is probably the most salient of these contradictory repetitions. In verse 7 to 8, and that is our Moses scroll, that's derived from there, Moses confers authority on Joshua in a declaration made before the whole people, and God plays no direct role. Here, it is God who charges Joshua, and the investment of leadership is enacted away from the eyes of the people in the sacrosanct space of the tent of meeting. The intricacies of the interwoven sources in this chapter need not detain us. Suffice to say that there appear to be 4 layers. An old source, well antedating the composition of Deuteronomy. Well, that would be our Moses scroll.
I agree.
A Deuteronomic source, some work by the presumably exilic editor of Deuteronomy. And finally, the editorial intervention of the redactor as the Torah as a whole. An orchestration of different strands may have been deemed necessary to provide an adequate conclusion to the book. Modern readers must keep in mind that the notion that most books were composite, heterogeneous in both authorship and literary genre, the product of collage, was naturally assumed in ancient Hebrew literature. But there you go. He identifies it well. I really like the way that he puts it.
Hey, I want to ask Ezra something here. Ezra, we get the picture here in our current Torah reading that this takes place in the tent of meeting. Now, I've come to realize that it looks like we have 2 different Ohel Moeds, if I can use an anglicized way to say the Hebrew. If that's the case, we have Exodus 33, we have the priestly tent of meeting. Which one is this talking about here?
Oh, okay.
Great question. What we see in Deuteronomy 31 is part of a broader literary and theological tension in the biblical text, especially when we read through the lens of the documentary hypothesis. In Exodus 33, the Ohel Moed, or tent of meeting, is described as a separate tent that Moses pitches outside the camp. It's an intimate prophetic space where Moses meets Jehovah face to face, distinct from any priestly activity. This aligns with the Elohistic or non-priestly strand of tradition, where the emphasis is on prophetic access and individual communication with Jehovah. But in P, the priestly source, the tent of meeting is synonymous with the tabernacle, the centralized sanctuary with its rigid sacrificial system and Levitical structure. In this version, access to Jehovah is strictly mediated through the priesthood, not through personal prophetic encounter. So how did we get 2 tents? Academic consensus sees these as 2 distinct traditions that were later harmonized. The Deuteronomist, working with older sources, preserved some elements from both strands. When Deuteronomy 31 refers to the Ohel Moed, it's unclear whether the author envisioned the prophetic tent of Exodus 33 or the tabernacle of P. But given Deuteronomy's theological leanings, favoring Moses as prophet over the priesthood, it's likely that the older prophetic tent is in view. The ambiguity is deliberate. The text is bridging two theological models, one centered on Moses the prophet, the other on priestly mediation.
Hey, Jono, I have a question. I think I can, or actually, I have a solution.
Go
You
on.
see, Ezra, thanks for that, by the way, Ezra, because he points out that if he had to guess, it's leaning more towards this prophetic tent, this intimate space where Moses encounters Jehovah face to face. I would agree with that. And notice that this is listed as E, which is the description Ezra gave there. And another clue is that both Moses and Joshua are there at this tent, this Ohel Moed here together, which is what we meet with in Exodus 33. And so I think that is the intention of the author. But again, the person who pulled all this together has this individual piece and plugs it in here. Even though we've already encountered this transfer of leadership elsewhere. So
we all agree then that is those two verses, 14, 15, are attributed to E. And what follows, according to Richard Elliott Freeman, from 16 on is DTR2, the Deuteronomist, the second Deuteronomist. So, and it's let me read it actually, because it says, the Lord said to Moses, now look, the Elohist says to Moses, right, then in verse 14, the Lord said to Moses, the time is drawing near for you to die. Okay. And then DTR2, the Lord said to Moses, you are soon going to lie with your fathers. So it's this constant repetition to poor Moses, going to die soon, it's coming close, going to happen. The people will thereupon go astray after the alien gods in their midst, in the land that they are about to enter. They will forsake me and break my covenant that I made with them. Then my anger will flare up against them and will abandon them and hide. I will abandon them. I will hide my countenance from them, and they shall be prey. And many evils and troubles shall befall them. And they shall say in that day, surely it is because our God is not in our midst that these evils have befallen us. Now, there's an interesting note here in the Jewish Study Bible. It says, our God has, abandoned us. He's not in our midst. Although the word Elohim, generally has this meaning, our God, singular, the Hebrew could also mean our gods, plural, which makes sense here. The people will have strayed so far from the covenant that they attribute the resulting divine punishment to other gods. This interpretation explains God's angry response in verse 18. And what he says in 18, he says, yet I will keep my countenance hidden on that day because of all the evil that they have done in turning to other gods. Okay, so that's certainly a possibility. The Dead Sea Scrolls want to take that possibility away. So what they have in 4Q30 from verse 17, it says, then my anger shall be kindled against them in that day, and I will forsake. It actually says, and I will forsake you instead of them, speaking to Moses, and I will hide my face from them, and they shall be devoured, and many evils and trouble shall come upon them, so that they will say in that day, haven't these evils come upon us because Jehovah, our God? So it puts the tetragrammaton in there,
right,
to dispel the possibility that they're saying that this is fallen upon us because our gods are not answering us, but Jehovah, our God, is not among us. And then it goes on to say, God says, I will surely hide my face from him, again, singular, in that day for all the evil which they have done, in that they have turned to other gods. There's some curious variations there.
Right.
All right. Where are we going now, Ross?
Well, let me ask you something. Next week, we're going to be focused on, don't get nervous, I'm not ready to wrap up, but we're going to be focused on a song. Now, I'd rather skip this textual whistle that says, hey, there's going to be this song, which we'll talk about later, because most scholars believe that the song is another layer. So let's look at the song, unless you have something specific. I would almost just say that next week we're talking about the Song of Moses, but now let's skip down to verse 24. Do you have anything if we do that?
Just going to say one quick thing before we get to 24, and that is in verse 21. In verse 21, it says, God says, "For I know what plans they are devising, even now, before I bring them into the land that I promised." The word devising, it's a rare word in the Torah. In fact, it only appears 2 times before this, and both of those are in Genesis, Genesis chapter 6 and Genesis chapter 8. "For I know that man's heart is evil, his devisings," and whatever it says.
Yeah.
Both of these are attributed to the J source. Interestingly, this is one of the words that Dershowitz employs in his reconstruction. So I'm not so sold on it. But in any case, so that's verse 21. We're going to 24 now. Before we get there,
wait. Yeah, I was going to say 23. Let me just touch 23. And you may have had that too. 23 is, once again, he gave Joshua the son of Nun a charge and said, "Be strong and of good courage. You shall bring the children of Israel into the land which I swear unto them, and I will be with you." Again, he's done that. Yeah, he's done that many times already. So he keeps giving again and again. Yeah.
Friedman and Baden attribute this verse to the Elohist.
Interesting.
So they agree on that. All right, 24 and on, go ahead. This is, now, by the way, Richard Elliott Friedman switches back to DTR1 here. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I tell you, in other words, DTR2 would be a next layer. DTR1, at least Friedman is backing up to an earlier source, but not back to this source that we're talking about. In other words, this also is third-person narration. What is about to follow is really connected more than anything back all the way to verse 9, where it says Moses wrote this Torah. So now, here's what we get in verse 24. "And it came to pass, when Moses had made an end of writing the words of this law in a book until they were finished, that Moses commanded the Levites that bear the ark of the covenant of Jehovah, saying, Take this book of the law, put it by the side of the ark of the covenant of Jehovah your God, that it may be there for a witness against you." And I want to stop there. This is probably the text that turned my life upside down. In a good way. Because I think when I first saw this, I didn't know about a Moses scroll. I'd never heard of Shapira. I never considered that Moses didn't write the Pentateuch. But when I read this, Jono, I stopped in my tracks because I realized I didn't know anything at this time. I thought I knew the Bible. But this tells me that someone is telling me that Moses finished writing the Torah to the very end. Now, first of all, we're in Deuteronomy 31. If the Torah, in our viewers' eyes, goes to 34:12, we're already learning here that it's done. Whatever Moses wrote is done. So let me say this. If people think that you and I are saying that Moses didn't write the Torah, they misunderstood our point. We believe, I think I can speak for you because we talk quite a few times a week.
Go ahead.
Moses did write a Torah. Moses did write the Torah, the instruction. But that is not the Pentateuch. Because whatever Moses finishes here, he gives it to the Levites and puts it in, tells them to put it in the side of the ark where it's to be kept. And this is the point that I want to stress, that this Torah is not at all talking about Genesis 1:1 through Deuteronomy 34:12. What are your thoughts on this, Jono?
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think that's perfectly obvious. And that has been our point throughout this entire series, which we are only a few Torah portions away from ending. We've done this whole series from the perspective through the lens of the Moses Scroll and through the documentary hypothesis. Why? Because we believe that the Moses Scroll represents something original, and the documentary hypothesis wants to tell us, well, let me tell you about all of these other authors that have contributed to this. And this little passage here screams of that fact. I think it makes it very, very clear.
Now, it is third person, so this is one of the 7 references in the Pentateuch, all third person, which say Moses wrote something.
Mm-hmm.
So we would agree that what Moses wrote was a Torah, not Genesis 1:1 through Deuteronomy 34:12, but it was a Torah. And that Torah consisted of commandments. We know if we put the clues together and mentioned in the Pentateuch, the blessings and the curses. Deuteronomy chapter 27 only has the curses.
Mm-hmm.
So he wrote this Torah, and it was much smaller. It's the same Torah that's in the memory of the Deuteronomist when he writes in Joshua chapter 8, verse 34 and 35. That Moses read, that Joshua read the Torah with the blessing and the curses. It's something you could knock out in a few hours, not something that would take 24 hours. Same thing we meet in Nehemiah chapter 8. They know this was a smaller document. One more thing, in 2 Kings 22-23, 2 Chronicles 34-35, we get a report that in the days of Josiah, in the 18th year of his reign, the Torah that Moses wrote was discovered in the temple. It was so revolutionary. It so shocked the people. It's not like they said, so what? Big deal. You found a Bible. Everybody's got Bibles. We have a Bible. We go to synagogue every Saturday. No, that's not what happened. It shocked them. Jeremiah was one of the prophets in the day, and he begins to talk about how the Torah has been made a lie through the lying pen of the scribe. So all of these clues come together to tell us that in the memory of the biblical writers, there is this smaller book, the one that Moses really wrote. It is called the Torah, but it's not the 5 books as you call a Torah.
Now, let me just read these verses because, again, a few verses ago, God is saying to Moses, let me tell you what's going to happen when they go into the land. They're going to turn against me. For I know that this is what they're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And here Moses echoes that. When Moses put down all the writing of the words of this teaching to the very end, Moses charged the Levites who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, saying, take this book of the teaching and place it beside the Ark of the Covenant against the Lord your God. Now remember, he's talking to the Levites. And let it remain there as a witness against you, against the Levites or against Israel. Well, I know how defiant and stiff-necked you are. Even now, while I am still alive in your midst, you have been defiant towards Jehovah. How much more than when I am dead? Gather to me, and then here it switches. So Richard Elliott Freeman attributes what follows back to DTR2 from 28 and on. Gather to me all your tribes and officials that I may speak all these words to them. And it seems like he's now speaking to the people. I'm going to call heaven and earth as witness against you. We talked about that last week. For I know when I am dead, you will act wickedly and turn away from the path that I enjoined upon you, and that in time to come, misfortune will befall you for having done evil in the sight of the Lord your God and vexed him by your deeds. And then it says Moses recited this poem. We'll talk about that next week. But this is, it reads very similarly to what God is expressing to Moses in the previous verses. And it's as if perhaps the same school of writers want to, they were given an assignment. How are we going to wrap this up? And someone said, well, let me have God saying this to Moses, and someone else said, well, let me have Moses saying this to the people or to the Levites. And they've tried to smush this together. But what seems really apparent is that both of these conclusions are saying, hey, let me tell you, we're at this at this end of history where we actually turned away and we were exiled and all these things befell us. We need to sort of write this in here as a prophecy. Is that the way that it appears to you?
That's what the scholars see, is that it's too well defined in terms of what did happen. And we already have demonstrated evidence that somehow a later writer is compiling stories. And you can see even a good reason for them to think, hey, let's warn the people. And they would know firsthand that this is taking place, especially if these things had already happened. So I do think that it clearly is a later pen. We have evidence all the way through. And let me just say one more thing about the switching back and forth, the third person, and, the references to the Moses completing the Torah. Again, these stories are meant to impress that there is a memory that Moses wrote a book. In fact, we meet with various books in the Bible that are referred to that we no longer have. The question became for me, and should be for everyone, is do we still have, can we recover what that little scroll that Moses wrote was, and what did it have? Did the people, just to get on a soapbox for a minute, did the people all throughout biblical history from the days of Moses know that they had these festivals that they had to keep, beginning with the first month, and and you work your way through Passover, unleavened bread, you go to the seventh, did they know that and just not keep them? Or were these festivals added later as a teaching tool to talk about the various things that were attributed to the history of ancient Israel? Because we do get evidence that they certainly, during the biblical period, didn't keep them. We get evidence when the scroll was discovered in the days of Josiah, they said that no king had kept these festivals. Do we ever have a record of David, even David, keeping any of the festivals? I mean, you would think some of the festivals maybe. Did he ever keep Yom Teruah? Did he ever keep Yom Kippur? Interesting question. And I want people to leave their comments. Show me verses where David or Solomon or kings and various stories in the Bible where these festivals are being kept. It's worth thinking about.
It's definitely worth thinking about. Next week we are in what is it? Ha'azinu. Okay, so we're going to be in this poem.
Song,
and
man.
Just thinking about this, Ross, my mood has shifted, because what this means is that we are finished with the Moses scroll. Like throughout so much of Exodus, even Leviticus, in Numbers, and certainly Deuteronomy, there have been crumbs of the Moses scroll scattered throughout. It's done. We're finished. There is no more Moses scroll in the following verses, as far as I know. Am I right about that?
Well, we may have just a little bit at the very end, at least a possibility of making a connection. But we'll talk about that when we get to chapter 34.
All right. Okay, we're going to do that. We will be back this time next week. Have a great week, dear viewers. Thank you for tuning in. Comment, like, share. Appreciate it. And we'll be getting into Ha'azinu next week. Ezra, take us on out.
That's going to do it for this week's Torah Pearls on Vayelekh. Thanks for walking with us through the text, tent by tent. Stick around for the after-class discussion with Ross, where we'll dig a little deeper and maybe ruffle a few scrolls. Don't forget to join us next week as we head into Ha'azinu. It's poetic, it's prophetic, and it packs a theological punch. Until then, Shabbat Shalom.